I'd say low voltage cable, network cable installer would be the title. But that's, I mean, you're really just getting started. That's a real small part of the industry. There's a lot of other stuff, and it's a good place to start. But you know, you can, after a couple years of doing that, you can move on to other things like network installation, you know, network hardware installation, phone system, PBX installation. It's going to be a little bit more challenging, a little more interesting. But the cabling provides a good base for it, because if you don't have that foundation of the cabling, then you're always going to be relying on other people to troubleshoot things for you, and you're never going to have the 100% confidence that it's not the cable that's the problem, and it's always going to be something nagging in your mind when you're troubleshooting a data link or a phone or a voice connection. Usually people who don't know anything about cabling are very quick to blame the cable, and it's rarely, 9 times out of 10, it's not the cable. It's usually something else, but because they don't have that foundation, they can't say for sure.
Well, I completely agree. I think the entry level into this industry is cable installation, because cable installation is you have to properly learn how to pull that cable. You then learn about the standards we were just talking about, the T568B versus A. From there, you branch out into other parts. You learn about dial tone, you learn about connecting telephones, you can become a systems installer for telephones or VoIP, or you know, LAN networks. So there's a lot of branching out.
And there's other parts to it too that are not necessarily tied to just low voltage. You got to understand the area of building code. So you got to know when to go through a firewall and not to go through a firewall. What's professional? I mean, we've seen people who have a lot of certifications, and of course Nova is a Cisco partner, and it's also a Microsoft partner. We've been doing some of those for years, but yet I see some people don't understand cabling, and they want to do some of the punch downs, and it looks like spaghetti, and it's like
or worse.
Yeah, and you move that patch panel a little bit, or you have to add something, and all of a sudden somewhere else it's not working because it was not properly punched down. So it really is the basics. And when people come to work for Nova, that's usually the first place we put them, is assisting in cable installation, and it takes a few months to get used to it day in, day out, to know exactly where you put the cable. You know, something else as a side note, I often hear people who don't understand cabling, they say, oh, you can't lay the cable across the fluorescent light. We've done that for 20 years, it does not affect anything. Or you don't have to test every jack, and we test every single jack that we put in. We certify using handheld certification equipment, because that one jack you don't test, that's the one that won't work, and you'll have to go back to fix. And go backs are very expensive, so every single jack, every single port on the patch panel has to be tested and labeled. And if you're going to spend the time to identify that jack, to label it on the patch panel, then why not test it at the same time? Just a minute or two, yeah. And it's done. And once you install, I mean, wire does not wear out, so we give a 15-year warranty on our labor and our parts, and it's the same parts we sell on Cable Supply. You know, we're not going to use a certain part in Nova and then not recommend it in Cable Supply, or vice versa. So it's the same parts, and we give a 15-year warranty, because once you put the cable in, unless someone fools with it or touches it or moves it, it's going to work for more than 15 years.
You know, not that I'm disagreeing with you laying it across a fluorescent light, but you know, there is an EMI factor, and you know, we take the necessary precautions to keep it away from things that make noise. I think the thing that I have the thing that I have noticed the most, if there's a cable across something that's creating a lot of noise, is that we might have trouble toning it out. There might be trouble just not being able to ring something out on the other end. So,
I have not experienced that trouble. I have never had a problem with.
You should get out more.
But you know, I know there's another question. Maybe we should answer that now. Is people have asked, when do they use shielded cable?
When the building itself probably has a lot of electromagnetic interference.
You know, I've only seen it 2 times where people needed shielded cable. One was It was next to a radio station, and they were getting buzzes on their phone. And once we put in shielded cable and grounded the cable, a lot of people, they have shielded cable, but they don't know how to use it. They don't know but you got to ground this cable. So the shielding around the cable has to be grounded. Once you ground it, you're not going to have your problems with eddy, static noise. And the other time is, as you know, a customer of ours uses a piece of equipment that produces a lot of radio frequency with it. They have a lot of transmitters, and that's the only 2 times. So I would say out of 1,000 installs, maybe 1 install needs shielded
That
cable.
really required it.
Yeah, and if you don't ground that cable, you just made yourself a big antenna. So you're worse than if you didn't have shielded cable to begin with. So, you know, if you're going to get it, make sure you terminate it right and you've got a true ground that you're connecting it to.
And what? I think it's been years since we put in any type of shielded cable, and that's how rare it is.
I would say there's probably not a typical day, especially since we specialize in medium to small businesses, so we're not going to spend years on a job site installing cable. You know, you go 4 or 5 different locations in a day. It's pretty normal as a technician. So you spend a decent amount of time on the road. But also you learn how to assess a situation, meet with a customer. The second you walk in the door, you're already looking for clues. How old is this building? What do the ceilings look like? How old is their equipment? How old does that faceplate look to me? Is it white and it's become yellow with age? You know, those are the things you look at, and you start to, you know, figure out what kind of questions to ask them. Where's your data closet? You know, these are not necessarily technical people, and you help them give you the information you need to get it done, and you help translate what they're looking for into the technical language you need to get it accomplished.
That's exactly right, Matt. You know, there's no typical day because there are so many different areas that we service with Nova. So I think you're absolutely right, and it really takes a technician a while to be able to learn the steps of troubleshooting, but also customer service. It's taking something from a level, like you said, of technical jargon down to a customer level, being able to walk in and answer their questions before they've even asked them. So it's walking in as a professional and providing the customers with excellent customer service and being an expert in our field.
Well, you know, sometimes too we're doing projects. So we're doing a project that it can be as little as 10 drops or as much as 400 to 600 drops. And a drop being meaning that the cable drops down in the wall and the ceiling to the outlet. And so in those situations, our typical day would be getting to the site, making sure the site is open, making sure the phone closet's been unlocked, and making sure we have access to the building. And usually when you're cabling a building like that, the customer's not there yet, or the employees of the customer is not there yet. So we have free reign of the building, and that's actually the easiest way to cable. And then we're going to get all our equipment ready, multiple boxes of cable. You don't want to pull one cable at a time. That's not very cost effective. So, and then you always pull to the longest location. That's preferable. There are some exceptions to that. And then you pull to the shorter ones. And you always pull from center out of the spokes. So you're always starting at the hub, which is usually or has to be the data closet where you're going to put your patch panel. And we've been doing this so many years that it's pretty no-brainer. You have the right tools, push poles that go across the ceiling, fishing rods that go up and down the wall. Some people say, you know, we'll get calls from customers and they'll say, oh, they're getting ready to put the drywall up, you need to get out here and cable. Well, in reality, if it's a commercial setting, they have metal 2x4s, you really don't want to get out there till after the drywall is put up. And you can comment on this because you put that cable up before the drywall, and this only applies to metal studs. What happens is the drywallers come in and they put the drywall up and they crimp the cable, get the cable between the drywall and the metal studs. You know, in commercial settings, the wall is open, as long as you have the right, I mean open as far as there's no insulation, there's no fire blocks in there, but as long as you have the push poles and the fishing rods and some of the other techniques that we explain on other videos, it goes pretty quick. And once you understand this, it's not a major mental thing. I actually like cabling. The day goes quick and I get a pretty good workout, which I need.
There is no typical day.
There's no typical install.
There's no typical install. Every building's a little bit different. Every closet, data closet, or data center is a little bit different. From a small company, from 2 or 3 or 10 people to, hundreds of people. There's no real typical answer to that, but it's the same skill whether it's 1 or 2 people in the office or 100 people in the office.
I tell you, the hardest thing though is when people say to us, well, electrician knows what he's doing, let him pull the cable to each location and you terminate. Pulling the cable is one skill, terminating is a totally different. And I've seen it where people thought they knew how to cable, and what they'll do is they'll pull one cable down and then they'll loop it to the next one, and then to the next one, and to the next one. Where in computer voice and data cabling, it's one cable for each outlet. And so that often runs into problems when there's other companies doing the pre-cable, what we call pre-cable, where you just pull the basic cable, haven't terminated it yet, and then asked us to come out and do what's called set finish, which means you punch it down on jacks, you put it on a faceplate and stick the faceplate on the wall. And you always want to make sure that faceplate goes on the wall after they paint, not before, because you put that on before and they put the the texture on the wall. Sometimes they'll texture right over top of your jack, and then they'll spray right over top of your jack, and it's horrible. And then you have to redo the whole thing.
Well, I think we've almost answered that question to begin with. I think the entry level is in the cable industry. Learning the cable, learning color codes, how to punch down a 25 pair cable and the color codes in a 25 pair cable, which extends into the color code of a jack and a color code of a patch panel. So the entry level is cabling.
And how did you start cabling? Besides it being the entry level, how did you get drawn into the entry level?
Actually, I was working with an electrician.
Mm-hmm.
Whose an extension of his job was to install voice cable.
Mm-hmm.
From voice cable, we started installing LAN cabling.
That was back in the
Way back in
Cat 3, 10 base T.
when you had several networks,
Mm-hmm.
coax networks, AppleTalk networks.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, several networks. So from there, learning telephone, learning dial tone, learning what a twisted pair cable was and a cross connect cable is.
And in reality, there's really, I don't know if there's any schools on this. People learn to do it and they pass it from generation to generation, from company to company. And after you've done it numerous times, you know how to do it. And then we hire people that have worked for other companies over the years, and they've showed us little techniques, and we've shown them, and they've moved on to other companies. But I don't know of any schools that teach this.
I don't know anyone who's come here and said they went to a school and knew what they were doing after attending the school. Usually it's a waste of money to attend a school that's going to teach you this stuff.
It's sort of much on-the-job training. How did you do it, Matt?
I started out of high school, working summers. Actually started with Nova cleaning phones in the warehouse, then eventually got to go out and cable. I started on actually a fairly large job, so I got to see kind of the opposite as the average person sees it. I started on a big job and then started working on smaller jobs, but you learn the building blocks are the same. They're just, each block takes longer with a bigger job or with versus a smaller job. So the process is always going to be the same. It's just you got to expand upon that. So I started out in cabling, and started out with voice and data cabling. That was in the mid-90s, late 90s.
Then into telephone system installations, programming, installing. And then with the introduction of voice over IP, then data hardware
Router switches.
switches.
And I know that's off track, but you know, Cisco has a great training program through their certification. And
For routers and
for
switches.
routers and switches. Telephones is usually the manufacturer of that telephone system. If it's not Cisco, Cisco of course trains on VoIP also. For me, it was through the Marine Corps, and then worked for a couple corporations in the meantime before you know, coming to Nova.
Get another job.
Yeah, you got to be able to see the color code.
I don't know anyway. I
No,
mean, for
it's-
your house, you could probably get someone else who doesn't have a color deficiency to help you, but if this is a career, get into software or something like that that's not going to require, it's kind of a requirement.
And it's,
Yeah.
it really, I think the problem with that is that there is no one each manufacturer manufactures their cable colors with just a very slight difference. There's always a white, blue, white, orange, white, green, white, brown. But that green color may be just a little bit different shade. And if you have a color deficiency, this job is going to be very difficult for you.
Before we started Cable Supply, we used a bunch of different manufacturers, and I'm not colorblind, and there was oranges, I could not tell the difference between a brown. When you're under a desk and it's dark, and I had to go get a flashlight and get a second person to give me a second opinion on it, because that's not any of the brands we sell in Cable Supply, but in the past, 10, 15 years ago, we've had that problem. So even as someone who doesn't have color blindness, it can be difficult to tell the colors apart.
There's an
sometimes.
orange, a brown, there's a brown and orange.
Yeah.
You know, one other thing too is I did know someone that had difficulties in seeing colors, and what they had is a very strong flashlight.
Yeah.
So sometimes, I mean, some people are just completely colorblind, they can't see the colors. I'd recommend that you go into become a Cisco technician or a Microsoft technician or something like that, something else in IT rather than cabling, sorry. But if you're not, if you have just, some people aren't completely colorblind, but they really need a lot of light to see the colors so that they can identify them. And I knew one technician that had that ability.